What's good? It is Sam here, and today I have a delightful video where we're going to go into some interesting news on Kamala Harris that nobody else is talking about because they're not looking at the data the way we are here. And then I have some supporting evidence that's also just a bunch of other data points to take a look at. But I wanted to also, in the second part, get your feedback on could Kamala Harris potentially be one of the next candidates to drop out, even though she might be doing well in polling data? I don't know, and we'll get into that in a second. But if this is your first time here, what's good? My name is Sam, and for those of you that are returning, it's good freaking see you. Let's get started. So, what initially triggered this was I'm doing my research for one of the factors in our power rankings of Facebook, and I came across and I was pulling the data for Kamala Harris, and I see that there's a ridiculous increase in the amount of people that were talking about her over the past 2 weeks, and I'm like, huh, that's kind of weird. But it's also she's losing followers over the last 2 weeks. This is likes on, so that's what I'm saying, followers, but it's likes on Facebook. And her growth is obviously it's going down. Where Pete and Andrew, that's the only other people I have in here so far, but these two guys are up where she's down. So something's going on. And then this is where I get the data. So this is all coming from Social Blade. You can see right here over the last 2 weeks here that she's dropped and she's losing, you know, 75 on average per day. It looks like there's a bunch over here. This is you know, this is 157, 125. There's 80. There's 11, 51, 45. There's just seems like losing a lot. So maybe something happened. So then that led me over to Google Trends, which tracks all of the searches done on Google on the internet, and then you can kind of look at like what people search for both on YouTube and on Google. So you get to see the collective of what the country is thinking about or interested in because they're searching for it on the two biggest sites in the fucking world. And this is over the last 2 weeks, just to be a relative comparison to what we have on Social Blade, right? This is 11.4. I have 11.1 here just because it was easier to press first than to think about what 2 weeks were. So that's literally the thought process I went through. But it is pretty close of approximation over 2 weeks. And you can see that her search volume on Google is just down and to the right, it looks like. Which is, there was this peak point right here, which I'm gonna get into in a second, right? So this is on Google. It looks like there was a tipping point where something happened here, right? This is search volume is going up, and then there's a new high right here, and then it's going up. So we have an apex right there where something happened, and she's losing momentum. But let's go over to YouTube, the second biggest website in the planet. It does not look as pronounced. It does not look as pronounced, but it does coincide with whatever happened right here because it was right in the middle of the graph when you looked at the Google, the web search. There was a peak right here, and that's where the turning point was. It looks like it could have happened here too, because if you look at the peaks here, right, we've got 3 peaks on the left and 2 on the right. First of all, I guess you could say this is a peak, but it's very, very, very low peak. So that's one data point that would say it's worse off, right? And then if you look at the other 2 peaks, both of the other 2 peaks are lower than the lowest of the 3 on the left. So it does look like she's losing ground on YouTube as well. But remember, this middle section, it looks like about a week ago, right? Today's the 11/17. So this is 11/8 right here, and 11/9. So yeah, just over a week ago. But let's go over here. So I took a look at her Twitter, and we see the same thing, right? So right around here on the 9th, something happened. She was gaining followers at a clip of like maybe 1,200 to 1,400 on average per day, in that range, right, for these first 6 days or so. And then something happened and she lost steam until all the rest of the month, except for one day here where she was losing, or she was only gaining half as much, roughly, maybe less in terms of followers, and one day where she lost a bunch. So even if you look at this average, the average is lower, even including this 1,300, because it gets negated by this. So this is kind of interesting. If you guys have any thoughts and know what happened, let me know down below in the comments. And if you use hashtag Stolt, I actually get into the comments at the end, just like I'm going to get into this video, and your comment can be on the after show of like what we talk about. So if you want that on there, then use the hashtag Stolt. It's easier for me to search for and find comments. So the last data point that I took a look at here was this is Alexa. So this is, they rank other websites around the world, and in the US her site's ranked 40,000th and change. Andrew Yang, which he is #1 in terms of the website ranking, he's ranked like 3,000th in terms of US popularity of his website, just to give some magnitude of difference between one, right, versus Kamala Harris. There's a giant, like, there's a big scope of difference between the popularity of these two people in terms, not, it depends on how you define popularity, but in terms of interest of people, traffic to their website. If you interpret traffic to a website as in interest around somebody because they're going to their fucking website, then yes, popularity could be part of that. But when you look at her site specifically on a global basis, right at the very end of September, we saw a big fucking drop off where we had another inflection point. So maybe this is like the wave was coming and building, and then it just hit a fucking brick wall, and the only thing that's left is like the little bit that splashed over the top, which are the other platforms where she was gaining the momentum. And is this a turning point where she doesn't have, right? We see right here from September she's just been down and to the right. I read in the news, and I don't follow what she says or anything, but I read some of the headline or something where Kamala Harris said she was like running out of money or something along those lines. So that would go in line with what we're saying, because the way that the money's getting invested to gain awareness and or the actual just message is not good, right? One of those two or both are happening. The money is not being spent in an effective way, and or the message that Kamala Harris is trying to get out to the world around what she thinks is the best way of doing things, that's not resonating with the world. They don't agree with what she is saying, or there's something going on there. So the message could be it as well, and they could judge the message for whatever reason they might. But the message has to be able to connect to people, right? Like that's one of the ways that you can get people's buy-in is by able to connect with them. If that's just not happening for whatever reason, she's been really losing ground. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are on if she could be kind of like the one surprise dropout of the candidates for the Democratic nominee, because people, I think, based on the polling, and this would be actually kind of interesting to take a look at live here. We're going to just jump over to Real Clear Politics and see if we can pull up the national polling data of where she ranks on here. Okay, so let's take a look here. She is, what is her last name? Oh, Harris. Right, so she is just behind Biden, it looks like. No. She looks like she's 5th on their ranking, or 6th. She looks like she's 6th on their ranking. So I don't know what your thoughts are, right? Because that's what the polling data is showing. This is what reality is. So what's going on? And let's actually take a look at theirs again, right? So let's see. Harris, it did look like they're confirming, right? It looks, I don't know, I actually have a data point. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it looks like she did have a dip according to the polling. This is interesting. Had a dip about a week beforehand. She had a dip in the polling, like a pretty deep drop in awareness right there, or the style of the poll or the audience of whoever they were polling wasn't actually representative, or whatnot. There's just like, this is just a tiny fraction of trying to understand what is actually happening. So it's very, there's so many different issues with this data that could be causing the problem. You're just not sure because there's just so much fucking noise when you like try to look at polling data like most of the world, most of the people in the US do. It just, there's way too much noise to try to like get a good understanding. Anyways, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Also, if you know anybody who is in the news, like, or who has a podcast or a YouTube show, or is in actual in like old school radio or in old school TV, like, share my shit with them and I'll have a conversation with them, and then they can have some actual news about like what's going on versus like real clear politics, and I'd appreciate it. Anyways, let's get into the comments here. This, I always like and enjoy getting into the comments, so thank you so much for the insightful, like, thought-provoking comments that you guys leave. I really do appreciate that. So this is from Matthew Honeycutt. What's good, Matthew? I appreciate your comment. As a scientific, I like the work you're putting in. As a scientific approach to the study, I'd like to challenge the conclusion. Sweet, I have not pre-read any of these, and this is in reference to a national Google ranking based on search volume. It appears that we are asserting that search for a candidate indicates the interest for that candidate, and that translates directly to willingness to vote for that candidate. That's what you could assume, but everybody's going to have a difference of opinion potentially. So if that's your interpretation, it's possibly true. You'd have to figure out how to test to see if that was true, and without, there could be a creative way to try to test that, but you'd have to test that to see if it's accurate or not. That definition that you mentioned there. These seem to be assumptions, but and maybe they are not, and I got too much into that one. But these seem to be assumptions. But how can we prove that correlation? So I think what I'm let's just finish the thought process that he had, so I stop interrupting him. Thoughts to challenge the conclusion. How many people have already hooked on a candidate and no longer searching? How many of these searches are from opposition of the candidate, searching for the ammunition to dispel that candidate? How many willing voters are following candidates via, more comment, via their social media, and therefore are searching via Google? But it's also like, okay, so there's a lot of good information here, but let's finish reading through it, and then we'll touch on some comments. Let's have a discussion why a person Google searches a candidate, how many times a person Google searches a candidate, etc. Definitely not knocking the work. No, I appreciate the dialogue, and same thing. I like the conversation, but let's better understand the conversation of the searches to willing and able voters. Well, awesome thought and comment here, Matthew. I appreciate that. So I think that a lot of this stuff, like, we're just not going to know, and it's going to be all conjecture, right? Without actual being able to test some of this stuff. But kind of, let's just go through here. How many people are hooked on a candidate and no longer searching? I don't know. I've never followed politics really closely. And over the past several years, I've had zero interest in what is going on in politics whatsoever. And as if you watch some of the videos, I've mentioned this multiple times, but I don't actually pay attention to what any of the candidates say. I just want to understand what Americans are thinking, because I think the current way of understanding what Americans are thinking through polling is not the most representative way of capturing what America's thinking. Maybe some blend of the two, which is what I'm going to be working on the next output I have for the power rankings. Somebody gave me that idea in the comments by going through these comments, which was a freaking awesome idea. But we'll actually be able to test a lot of the accuracy with this polling data, if you want to call it, version on the internet. But it's based on like the amount of noise that we talked about in these numbers. Like, there's a ridiculous, I'm trying not to use bad words, and there's so many there's so many issues with data captured in this way. Just a They try to take care of it. Like, I've studied statistics for a number of years, but there's so many issues that come into that when you just look at the data, right? This is like the search volume on these sites. Just to me, that's way more accurate and representative. In terms of like the ammunition from other candidates, I don't think that's probably a pretty small percentage. I think most people only give a shit about their candidate, and they literally don't even take the time to think about the other candidate like whatsoever, not even slightly, because then they might like be open to learning, right? And I don't know. I just don't see that being a very big proportion of the people who are searching. How many willing voters are following candidates via the social media and therefore aren't searching for candidates? I don't know. I think the more the interesting way to actually look at something like that would be looking at people who are following them on social media, and I would actually expect the correlation to be the other way around. Whereas if somebody's following somebody on social media on multiple platforms, that there's a higher probability that they are going to have more search volume on average than the group that is not following them on social media on a like a collective basis, to really understand that. You know what I mean? Just because I feel like if somebody's interested enough to follow them, then they're probably also interested enough to search for them. Could be 100% wrong. I'd love to see the data, and if I saw that I was wrong, I'd let you guys know for sure. I don't know what like the outcome would be, but it would be super interesting to see. And then let's have a discussion about why somebody searches for somebody. I think that's a very good. I think it's pretty simple in the way that I view it is just interest, right? And then you could define interest in many different ways, as in like they're interested to understand the dividend thing, the freedom dividend, the policies that he's talking about. They want to see just news on him. They want to, whether a small portion of them are trying to find dirt on him. Like, people are just interested because they have their reasons. Everybody's got their own like motive for living life the way that they do, and that's why I just define it as collective interest. Like the collective essence of the American mind is thinking about that this number of times. That's kind of, it's very like heady, but that's how like I think about it, to try to understand what's going on. And I'd say the collective of the country, just from the sheer volume of data points. YouTube and Google are the top two sites in the freaking planet, and they have been number one and number two. Google's number one, YouTube is number two for years. Doesn't mean they can go away. Like, they can definitely go away, but they are number one and number two. And then some of the other stuff that we look at is also up there too. It just seems way more representative than like, look at like, I'm probably not going to even be able to pull up something at this moment, but if we clicked over to the Economist, the YouGov thing, and we looked at their polling data, I bet it's only several thousand. It's not even, it's not that big in terms of the sample size. Okay, maybe this is a sample size. Yeah, sample size of 1,500. Like, we're talking about 1,200 fucking people here, bro. Like, this is people are they're trying to use, like, look at, oh my goodness, look, 1,200 people. Okay, 1,200 people are dictating the decisions and the collective interest of Americans. Like, I think it should be a more collective idea of what the American public are thinking than 1,200 freaking people. That's just, come on, like, anybody. Anyways, if I'd love to hear your comments, use the hashtag Stolt in the comments below and get your comments on at the end of the show. I appreciate you guys. Talk to you soon.